Hey guys, this is Songbird Ultralight, and today I'm going to be reviewing for you the Mountain Laurel Designs Spirit 48 quilt.
So awesome.
I don't normally use stuff sacks, so I just went ahead and threw this quilt in a mesh bag to give you an idea of what it could pack down to. This mesh bag is kind of stretchy, so it gives you a pretty good idea of what like the actual packed volume is. The reason this quilt doesn't pack down any smaller, for a 50-degree quilt you would think it would be a little smaller, is that this quilt is actually synthetic. Compared to down insulation, synthetic insulation is usually going to be a little bit more bulky when you pack it up. Synthetic insulation, like the Apex used in this quilt, performed really well for me as I finished the last 600 miles of my hike. If you guys have watched the videos about how I pack up my ultralight frameless hiking pack, honestly, sometimes it feels like I need more bulk instead of less. The little bit of added bulk for this quilt really isn't a problem. In fact, the synthetic quilt, compared to a down quilt of a similar rating, is really going to help me stabilize the load inside of my frameless pack. There's a lot of things that I really like about this quilt, so I want to go ahead and get into those with you guys. First, some specs on the quilt. Mountain Laurel Designs, what everyone calls MLD, has a line of these quilts made with synthetic insulation that range from 28 degrees to 48 degrees in rating. But I only have experience with the Spirit, so that's what I'm going to talk about. For simplicity's sake, I usually just refer to this as my 50-degree quilt. I think that maybe MLD wants to set themselves apart a little bit from the normal 50-degree, 30-degree, 40-degree ratings. Obviously, you want to set yourself apart from your competitors, but I don't necessarily know that that helps. The first thing to note about the Spirit is that it is made with synthetic insulation. My size large with the poncho slot that I'll talk about in a second comes in at 341 grams, which is under spec. I could talk about the dimensions in terms of length and width and all of that, but it's so variable based off of the size quilt that you choose and what width you need that I would just encourage you to, if you like the idea of this quilt, go and look at the sizing chart yourself on MLD's page, which I'll link down below. Their sizing descriptions and their descriptions of the product are really good, and they're really going to guide you to picking the right size quilt for you. And I would just say that, like MLD says, when in doubt, go up a size. It can be your top quilt while you're sleeping on the ground or in a hammock, and it has these tough little sewn nylon loops here at the corners that let you use it as an underquilt. If you don't know much about hammocks, an underquilt is a quilt that hangs underneath you in your hammock so that you don't compress it laying on top of it, and it replaces your sleeping pad or your emergency blanket that you might use to keep you warm from underneath. I would probably use it as a top quilt and a jacket instead of an underquilt and a jacket. Now, the one exception to this that I can think of is if you are in three season and you want to have something that you can throw on top of your really lightweight puffy, and you don't always necessarily need to have access to this. It would be really handy to be able to unclip your underquilt or take it out of your pack if it's not being used in camp and wear it as a poncho over your existing puffy to hugely increase the amount of worn insulation you have on your torso, really giving you a warmth boost. Now, a lot of times you'll see people wearing quilts around camp like this. They'll wear it around them like a warm blanket, and that's perfectly fine. But having the quilt open like this while you do work isn't really trapping any heat, and you're gonna drop it. It's not gonna rest on your shoulders. Wrapping a quilt around you like a blanket's gonna work fine in the warmest months, in the warmest climates. But when it gets a little chillier at night, you're really going to want a piece of insulation that you can wear around you and gives you a lot of warmth. Now, another way that people will sometimes wear a quilt that doesn't have a poncho head slot is as a sash or as a sarong, and they can kind of wrap themselves up in it like a toga. This provides a lot more warmth than wearing it as a cape or having it wrapped around you while you're trying to do stuff at the same time. It does a lot better job at keeping the quilt from getting in the way while you try to do camp tasks. I lost all that footage. Gotta redo it. Okay. At the end of the day, wrapping it around you like a blanket isn't going to be as warm or as hands-free or as functional as just having something that goes over your head like a poncho and can cinch around you. So now I'm going to show you how this thing fits and talk about the wearability. Now, most nights and chilly mornings, I would just wake up in the quilt, pop the head slot open and put my head through and wear the quilt around just like this. I feel that just wearing it as a poncho gives me that little bit of extra warmth that I need in the mornings, especially as I sit around camp getting some breakfast in me and kind of rubbing the sleep out of my eyes, brushing my teeth, stuff like that. If you do want to close the quilt up around you a little bit more and get more warmth out of it like I did on the colder nights on trail, you just make use of the pad strap. You'll find these on a lot of quilts. What it does is it holds the quilt down to your sleeping pad You strap it around your sleeping pad or around your body to keep the quilt from coming off during the night. I don't use this while I'm sleeping. I find that it's much more useful just as a belt to keep the poncho around you. You snap this here together, and then you'll draw it tight. It gives you a nice cinched waist to keep the quilt from flowing around you too much. Now, if you really want to trap more body heat, you can. At both the foot and head ends, there are these snaps built into the corners. You're going to be able to snap those around your waist and then make use of the drawstring integrated in both the head and foot ends to kind of tighten it up around your hips. You can snap one end around you from front, and you can snap the other around from behind. The back side of the quilt or the poncho while you're wearing it is going to have these snaps too. And you can use that too to cinch up so that you have the back and front wrapped around your body. With both the head and foot end cinched around your waist, you get a lot more closure here, and you wear it much more like a vest instead of a loose flowing poncho. I'm also a little bit more security conscious than maybe some people are with their hiking equipment. While I like having really bright colored clothing and gear, sometimes with my backpacks and the gear that I'd leave around camp when I go get water and stuff, I like that equipment to be a little bit more dull in color, a little bit less eye-catching. Just my thought is that this equipment is stuff that I have to have with me, and encourage someone to notice it and think like, oh, that's a pretty quilt, I'm gonna take it. Sometimes you just have to leave your equipment somewhere where you don't necessarily want to. Usually you're gonna have to leave your pack outside of a store or a restaurant if they're worried about you bringing your pack in there. And you don't always want your stuff to stand out. You want to have the ability to stash your bag somewhere where it's not going to be very obvious. Or even if you're walking into a place with your backpack, it's not some loud, bright thing that stands out as hiking equipment. And again, it's not going to catch a potential thief's eye. Now, this poncho head slot is pretty nicely sized. It can be a little tight getting it over your head if you have a hat on or something like that, some glasses. You might have to pop those off in order to get the quilt on and off easily. My hair snags a little bit if I've got it in a bun or a ponytail, and that's a little annoying, but you really don't want that neck opening to be too big. It's just going to keep venting. All your body heat's going to rise in the garment, and you don't want body heat to just leak out of here. In the summer, it's not a huge deal, but it's nice to have your clothing work more efficiently for you where it can. If you're wondering why there's snaps and not Velcro, that's why, because it is a wearable garment and it needs to be comfortable in both respects. Now I'll stand up here and show you how the poncho quilt fits me around my waist. It hangs down a little bit in poncho form, and then snapped up together in more of a vest shape, it's a little bit more form-fitting, and I'll show you that. This is how I wear it most of the time. Here it is in poncho form. Again, this is a large, and I'm about 5'10", but the quilt hangs to the back of my knee and gives me a lot of warmth around my thighs and hips that I didn't expect. As nice as a puffy is sometimes, it doesn't really go down past your waist, and you kind of lose a lot of warmth that you could get with a longer cut of fabric. And you're gonna go around your waist and just snap those snaps behind your back. And worn all cinched up, it's gonna give you a lot more warmth than just wearing it as a poncho. After you whip off the quilt, let's say you're ready to get into bed and you want to use the poncho quilt as just a quilt, you're just going to snap these 3 snaps here on the poncho slot opening, and that'll seal it up, and you're done. It is now a quilt. It's beautifully simple, it works really well, and most of the time I just use the quilt like this since there were a lot of warmer nights on trail this summer. Even getting up into Vermont, especially tucked into my bivy sack at night and getting away from mosquitoes. It was really nice to have just a big blanket, be able to kick my feet out, be able to push the quilt around to vent, have it over me in some places and not in others. But even if you're a warm sleeper on the coldest nights, you're gonna wanna be able to form a foot box. And you do that by snapping these snaps and lining up the Velcro. Just like this. And that gives you a tube of fabric here, and you're going to cinch up the foot end here to finish forming the foot box. Then you have a really nicely closed up foot box. I haven't noticed any drafts or anything of the kind coming through here. That said, this is a summer bag, and it's not like I needed it cinched up super tight in order to stay warm. So I do have a size large, and I guess that gives me a really nice long foot box here that's about the length of my arm from the inside of my armpit. That nice long foot box means that my feet aren't gonna pop out accidentally, my legs are nicely nestled in there, and the less heat producing portion of my body My legs don't really produce a lot of their own heat or anything. It's not like your core is constantly throwing off heat. All that heat gets trapped down there where you really need it. But even though the foot box does come up pretty much to right below my knees, it doesn't feel constricting. It's not like the tapered end of a mummy sleeping bag where your knees don't have room to be apart from each other and it feels kind of like you're trapped or claustrophobic. Moving up the sleeping bag, we get to the poncho head slot. And this, I think, to be fair, is the real downfall of the poncho slot. MLD uses 3 snaps here for the poncho head slot to keep it closed. At the very ends, it overlaps pretty well, but in the middle, you're gonna have these 2, maybe 2-inch gaps here. There isn't a huge amount of overlap in the fabric, and sometimes you can feel a little draft around your knees. I did all right with it on colder nights because I have my bivy sack and that material is right here keeping everything sealed up. So it's not like I have cold air rushing in or hot air escaping constantly. Anything that does leak out will get trapped by my bivy and be retained a little bit better by that sleep system. But if you're using this as a hammock quilt, or if you don't use a bivy, you might notice a little bit of drafting around the knees at night on colder nights. Granted, this is a 48 or just a 50-degree top quilt, and in the warmer temperatures, especially in the summer, that you're gonna be using this, 9 times out of 10, you're not gonna care at all that this is there. In fact, on the really hot nights, I would leave this open on purpose just to get a little extra ventilation. Unfortunately, I'm a strange combination of being someone that has to have something over them in order to fall asleep, and I'm a really hot sleeper. So on warmer nights, I really need to be able to kick a foot out or have extra ventilation options. So that actually was really nice on the warm nights. Without my bivy though, I think it would have bothered me on the colder nights. And I think it does take a pretty good chunk out of the rating of your quilt. If you sleep on your back, for example, that heat's gonna rise up from your hip area and your knees, and it's going to leak out of there. If you have a hole in your sleep system, you're gonna affect the rating. And this poncho head slot is an option on the quilt. I don't think that the temperature rating on the bag, as advertised on the website, actually accounts for the head slot being there. Again, in the summer, I don't think it's a huge problem. I think that you can combat this by going up to a 40-degree quilt, or what they call the 38 spirit. With a bivy, again, it is going to be negated a little bit, but it's definitely something to think about. You're going to affect the rating of your bag a little bit with this. All of that said, all those warnings aside, it did not bother me at all this trip this summer. For 600 miles up north as far as Vermont, where I finished right across the border in Hanover, New Hampshire, colder nights down in the lower 50s, perfectly fine, no issues whatsoever for me, but I am a warm sleeper. Moving up to the top of the quilt is the chest snap and drawstring. How this works is that when you wear the quilt at night for warmth in your sleeping system, you'll snap this top snap here and put this loop around your neck. You can then use the drawstring to tighten the fabric up around your neck. If I have to get up and do something at night, it's pretty nice to just be able to unsnap it behind the neck. And then when I come back from going to the bathroom or whatever it is, I can just snap this back around my neck, and then I can hop back into bed without having to fiddle with it too much. That's definitely one aspect of my mummy sleeping bag that I did not miss this summer. I hate having to get up and go to the bathroom, or having to get out of my sleeping bag and grab a snack, and having to unzip myself and then get back in and zip back up. And it's nice to just be able to snap the quilt on around your shoulders and tuck your feet in and be good to go. It says this on the MLD page, and in my experience it's true. You can use either side of the quilt and it's the same exact thing. So last few notes on the quilt, there's an argan fabric on the inside and out. I find that if I'm a little damp from some light rain, or if my feet are damp from taking off my socks and being a little sweaty, it's a little annoying trying to put your feet in the foot end of the sleeping bag. Your wet skin will kind of stick to the argan. It's just a quality of these technical fabrics that they like to kind of cling when you're clammy. That isn't at all a deal breaker. It's something that I've had to deal with every sleeping bag and every quilt that I've ever owned. But maybe with some fabrics like this argan, it's a little worse. I do want to say that I had some serious dew at least 1 or 2 nights, and I had some serious sweat a couple other nights where I sweat because I was hot, and then the temperatures dropped and the quilt kept me warm even though I was damp, or where my clothes were wet from days of rain and I didn't have a stitch of dry clothing to put on for sleeping. And the quilt kept me warm, and even kept me warm enough to where I was able to cook my clothing dry underneath it. The quilt itself has been wet from just days of rain. Eventually it will get into your pack, eventually it will get onto your gear. And even though it's been damp from dew and from days of rain, just super humid conditions. The quilt did really well and kept me warm, and that's exactly why I picked this synthetic quilt to use this summer, and it absolutely did everything that I needed it to. It was really great. I really liked it. It kept me warm in camp, it kept me warm in bed, and I was really very happy with it. Please note that I am a warm sleeper, and I just want to warn you again that if you're a cold sleeper, or if you don't have a bivy, or if your sleeping pad isn't as insulated as mine was maybe, I used a Thermarest Neo Air full length, then you might want to go up so that you have a 40-degree quilt instead of a 50-degree quilt. I think that with a little bit different gear, this kind of could have been pushing it. It worked really well for me, but you might think about adding 10 degrees of warmth just for a little bit more range and what you can use it in if it gets cold up in the mountains. That said, if you're going to be camping in warmer climates like in the south, I wouldn't go any warmer than this in the summer. In fact, there were a couple nights where I actually just slept in my bivy sack and had my quilt off to the side because it was so hot and muggy. It is a quilt, it is a blanket, so when it's really hot, you're not, sometimes you just don't even want a sheet. You wish you could sleep naked. I'll say that my comfortable range for this quilt was in the lower 50s up into the mid to upper 60s. I was much more comfortable around 60 degrees in this without getting super hot. Above 60 degrees, getting into the 70s, it started to get a little warm. I do think that the poncho slot makes this quilt more appropriate for summer use. I think anywhere where you're going to get below 45 degrees in temperature, you're going to want to add something to this. And if you're a cold sleeper, you're probably going to want to go with something that doesn't have a head slot, just to make sure that you don't have those drafts in your sleep system when you're having those colder conditions. The inside and outside fabric are 10 denier, and they are coated with a DWR. That's going to be a ripstop fabric. I don't have any holes or rips or tears or pop stitches anywhere on this bag. The manufacturing quality is excellent. The stitching is very nice. I'm fairly gentle with my gear. It's all ultralight, super ultralight stuff, but I haven't had any issues with this 10 denier fabric ripping, tearing, or anything like that. And again, that Apex synthetic insulation in there is just perfect for warm summer nights. I really enjoyed using this, and I look forward to using this again on warm trips. I recently got to use this quilt in my hammock on our trip down to Florida. For 4 or 5 nights as we camped and swam in some springs in North Florida, this was my sleeping insulation. It was warm enough down there that I kicked it off of me a lot. I vented it and didn't have to use the formed foot box, and it performed really well in the hammock. I don't see why this couldn't be your dedicated hammock top quilt. I think coupled with the fact that in warmer weather, you're going to be able to use it as a poncho as well. It's just a really nice weight savings whether you're a ground sleeper or a hammock hanger. Either way, I think you're going to be really happy with a poncho slot quilt like this. So guys, I want to say thank you as always for watching the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you like this content, if you want to see more like it. I'm going to continue going through all of the equipment that I had with me on this 600-mile section, finishing up the Appalachian Trail. I have completed the whole trail now, and these gear reviews are based out of months of experience with this equipment in real usage conditions, and I'm really having a lot of fun doing it, and I look forward to bringing you guys more reviews. If you haven't seen it yet, please refer to the previous video in this series where I show you guys everything that I had with me and give little snippets on it. If there's any equipment that you want me to review next out of that list, please let me know in the comments, and I will push it to the front of the list for making the review videos. It could take me a while to get all this stuff out, and I want to make sure that you guys get to see what you want to see first. Thank you so much, guys, for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.